Well, good morning, everybody. I promise you, if you got here late, well, you were late. Let's start with that. No, I'm just kidding. I would put more seats in here, but every time I do that, I think it's a curse because I put more seats in, then y'all don't come back. So I think we're just going to have to leave it this way. We're going to have to squish and get to know one another because I get nervous adding seats. But welcome. So glad to see such a full church today as we celebrate the third Sunday of Epiphany. And today is one of my favorite readings, one that you hear a lot. You probably have heard some semblance of this in your upbringing, or maybe if you've grown up in the church, you've heard about the calling of the disciples. And today we hear about the calling of four: Simon, Andrew, James, and John, the sons of thunder, as they're called later, are called by Jesus. But what's important about Mark is that Mark doesn't say anything that's not important. So even at the very beginning of this reading, where Mark tells us, now after John was arrested, Jesus came to Galilee proclaiming the good news of God, there's something significant about the fact that John was arrested. And so you see, that's how Mark tells his stories. They're very short, sweet, and to the point. And every line is packed. You could preach a sermon on one word in this passage, one phrase, one thing, like now after John was arrested. Because you see, it has implications. It has implications for the text and for the life and teaching of Jesus and what he's doing, that John was arrested. But what I want to focus on today really is this calling of these four disciples. And I want to have a little bit of a conversation with you. We're going to do things a little differently. I know we're Episcopalians, Matt. It's okay. We're going to do it differently. What I want to do is I have a question, and just shout out your answers. It's okay. I expect everybody to speak up. If you don't, I'll just come to you with a microphone right in your face. I'm just kidding. But I do have a question. I do want you to shout out. If something comes to you, please shout it out. I have this question. Thinking about these disciples today who left exactly what they knew, what was familiar, and they came and to follow Jesus. The question I have for you is, what thing or what something would cause you to leave everything you know as normal and do something radically different? What would move you out of a place of normalcy to something radically different? Say it loud. Faith, trust, love, passion. I heard something. Bacon. Bacon. I like it. Nate, I love you for that. Bacon is a fair answer. And for me, it would be cheese grits, buddy. What about back there, young lady? Say it louder. Full belief. Did I hear that right? Full belief. What about you? We've started the food train. Pancakes. A fair answer, though. Pancakes is good. What else? An epiphany. It's interesting that it's the season of Epiphany. Thank you for that. Yeah, that's special. What about over there, John? Following God. Thank you. Anything else? These are all good answers. Oh, one more. Last one in the back. Love. Beautiful. All great answers. All great answers. And when you look at this text, we get none of that. Zip. All we know. See, the church for years has wrestled with this text because it makes us so uncomfortable. We want to hear that the disciples had something like that happening in their life that made them follow Jesus. You hear scholars argue about whether they knew Jesus before that day he came waltzing by. Maybe they heard him teach or preach somewhere. Well, that's not really in the text. We can't really assume that happened. Some assume maybe they had some radical transformation which made it easier for them to follow. They just did. But really all we know, and this is what makes us so uncomfortable, is that Jesus, some guy by the name of Jesus, came walking by and said, hey, Simon and Andrew, why don't you come follow me? Oh, James and John, why don't you put those nets down, leave your poor old man to deal with the nets and the hired men and come follow me. That's all we know. We know nothing else. We don't know if they knew Jesus beforehand. We know nothing. We don't even know if they did it out of love for God, for pancakes, or bacon. We don't know if they did it for any of that. We just know that Jesus called them right in the midst of their real life. They stopped what they were doing and followed him. And as I was reading this text this week, I started thinking about my own life. And I started thinking about how hard it is to follow God when he calls. How much security I want to have in that. You know, I can remember when I felt called to the priesthood. I don't know if I've ever shared this story. I woke up one day, and I just went downstairs. It was a Saturday morning. We always had family breakfast of bacon and pancakes and cheese grits on Saturday morning. But I remember going downstairs and telling my mom, I think I'm called to be a priest. And she was, in those big mixing bowls with a wooden spoon, was stirring up the pancake batter over the sink. Well, that pancake batter went everywhere. She's like, what? What did you just say? So then, of course, in good mother fashion, she had to load me up in the car. She called the priest and said, we got to do something about this. I think he might be possessed. No, but she did. She called the priest, and that same morning, she took me over to meet the priest, and I started in conversations. And I was only 16 years old. And I really don't know why that feeling came over me. I just kind of had a dream. But as I got older and I went to college, I fell out of that calling. I didn't care about it anymore because I didn't see security in it. I didn't see security in a call to be a priest. This is all I knew. You didn't get paid a whole lot. A lot of people are never going to like what you do. The church is a tough place, especially Episcopalians, because we don't like to change. This is what I knew. I say that. I know some of you are chuckling. It's the awkward laughter. I get it. It's okay. But as a young guy in my early 20s, 21, 20, that is what I was wrestling with. And I was a business major in college, and I saw other things that seemed to be more security-driven, particularly for a family. If I wanted to have a family, I believed I had the right to raise my children a certain way, for me to be able to afford them to go for certain schools and things like that. You see, my mind was all on material things. Well, that train did not make it to the second station before it just derailed. Because the more you go down that train of thought, as I learned early on, the less fulfilling life becomes. Because I got to the end and realized that the rate I was moving, the more I moved down the road of insecurity and scarcity, the more I realized I was never going to have any kind of abundance. Was never going to have enough. Not even if I became the CEO of the biggest company in the world, which I don't even know what that is right now. But I knew I was never going to have enough because there was always something more I wanted. So then I had to regroup and think for a second, what's preventing me from following God's call in my life right now that I feel inside? I mean, I know it's there. I hear him calling. And I came back, not that I'm a saint by any means, because I still wrestle with those questions every day. As my wife and I even think about having a family, I still wrestle with those questions. I'm human. But I remember coming back to that place and realizing, what's God really calling me to do? He's calling me to trust and follow. It's that simple. And I started to think about a mission trip that I went on earlier in my life when I was in youth group. I went on a mission trip. You see, I went like most youth. Most youth go on mission trips for themselves. I was the same way. They go because they want to do something to themselves, not necessarily impact others. For sure, they want to impact others, but it's usually most of us go on mission because it starts with a selfish note sometimes. Not everybody, at least for me it was. It was very selfish. But I went to New York City thinking I was going to change the world, as any good, I think I was 13-year-old would do. You think you're going to change the world. We worked in a lot of soup kitchens, and I remember sitting in a soup kitchen, and we served one young man. His name was Tommy. He was about 7 years old, or so he thought. He was born on the street, so he didn't actually know his age. He assumed he was about 7. His mom was Jordan. They would come to this soup kitchen every day for lunch, and we fed him lunch. Remarkable young man, talked about the love of God all the time to everybody, to anybody who would listen. He would talk about how Jesus loved him and Jesus could love you too. Everybody. Well, after we got done serving lunch, we were outside cooling off, and of course they walk down the alley because they don't travel on the main streets because everyone looks at them funny and wonders who they are, and they smell funny, look funny. So a lot of the homeless in that part of New York would use the back alleys or the less populated streets to travel, so that's what he was doing. And down the alley was an older gentleman who was homeless sitting on the ground. He just had his cup up, and he was kind of putzing through his change that was in his cup. Tommy got to him, reached into his tattered, dirty jeans, pulled out some amount of change, and dumped it right into that man's cup. Dumped it right in. Everything that Tommy probably had, right into that man's cup. And said, Jesus loves you, and kept going. Next day, I see Tommy in the soup kitchen with Jordan, his mom. And we get to talking to Tommy, and we're like, Tommy, you know, you gave away all your change. And he looked at us without skipping a beat, at a whopping 7 years old, to us distinguished 13-year-olds, and said, isn't that what Jesus asked us to do? And I thought, Tommy gets it. He gets it. He felt like God was calling him to a certain ministry. Now, he wouldn't have said ministry, but to a certain place of sharing God's love with others, which is all Tommy did day in and day out, was share love. Sometimes it was in the form of change. Sometimes it was in the form of a hug. Sometimes it was in the form of a hot biscuit that he gave to somebody else instead of eating it himself. Tommy understood that God called him to share the gifts that he had to change and affect the world. And he knew he wasn't perfect at it, but he tried. And I remember sitting there when I was in college, remembering Tommy and thinking, what am I worried about? All I have to do is trust and follow. And I remember thinking about Tommy, and that day was an epiphany for me. That was my epiphany in life. And I shifted gears and got right back and lived into the calling that God called me to, which brought me here, to this place. When I read the gospel today, and I see these disciples, I'm just reminded of the importance of discipleship. But the first step in discipleship is letting go. It's letting go and moving the obstacles that we put in front of us, between us and God. It's moving those out of the way and trusting God when we follow. We don't know where the road's going to lead us. We can look ahead in the story and look at where these disciples went. We know Simon. Simon's going to deny Jesus later on. Simon's going to get a little ahead of Jesus. We know the sons of thunder, James and John, they're going to want to go sit on Jesus' right and left because they don't understand what Jesus has to do for them. So they're not perfect. They don't always make the right decision. But yet they still follow Jesus, and Jesus never leaves them even